Okay, continuing then. With this question of the why of many of our symbols, of even the calendar, or a lot of these things, okay? Pike's answer, as I understand it, is almost like a radical interpretation of the G, which is something I actually agree with. I'd like to see what you think of it. The G, obviously great architect and geometry, but when we say geometry, what we could be thinking of is almost a pattern. Let's say, for example, the old Greek concept of the logos, right? Which is that creation and everything in it is preformed as a kind of higher level pattern, an idea in the Platonic sense. And everything is going to, in linear time, play out different versions of this pattern across whatever timetable it takes. In other words, ideas of God, for example, right? This was, the idea that all the individual separate gods must be perceived first until you get a big picture view, and sort of like the Pharaoh Akhenaten, the first monotheist, you can get to the idea that they're all on the outer edges, and you get to the center, and that's where the monotheistic God is. And then it's developed consequently through other interpretations, Jews, Christians, Muslims, to get to a more refined view of the deity, let's say. But it's all pre-programmed in this theory before anybody comes on the scene. In that world of Platonic ideas exists outside of what we normally consider to be linear time, right? And so the idea then would be symbolism, and the idea almost of a calendar of light being the predetermined program by which all these things are going to emerge, resulting in, at the end, Freemasonry's New World Order, let's say. Pike's version of it was the new, almost the Baconian new Atlantis, America being the final manifestation of all this. So in the Pike theory, the G is constantly manipulating people across the centuries. They're reacting to this pattern, and it's not like a personal, I come up with this thing and I know why. It's almost like I tap into whatever portion of the pattern is relevant to my time and place, and I produce my own interpretation. So then the symbolism, even though there's no cause-effect linear reasons why, connections between the different symbols and how they're interpreted, they would all unfold predetermined across the centuries to result in the final view, which Pike claimed was his view, of course, which then we can look back and see the whole pattern at the end. What do you think of that idea? It's kind of, maybe a little airy-fairy for your taste, but yeah. And almost like a Jungian...
It's a bit eschatological, isn't it?
It is, absolutely it is.
Which is not something that I'm...
Because it would imply an apocalyptic revelation at the end that all this has been leading to.
Yeah, which is something that I'm not a great advocate of. Because
of how it can be misused and perverted?
Not really. I'm more of the belief that things are, that the start is infinite and the end is infinite. I don't see this great apocalypse occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Look, yes, various symbols have been around as long as there's been mankind. There will always be various geometrical figures, objects, you name them, that will be taken as symbols.
Mm-hmm.
And various people in history will latch onto these things with their own interpretation, which is not necessarily that something that they've thought up themselves. It's part of the whole consciousness of what they've been doing and what they've been reading.
Mm-hmm.
As an author once said, I don't know where my ideas come from, but talking to people, it's all obviously been gathering all over my life.
Mm-hmm.
And as a mathematician, to me it's a bit like the example of Newton and Leibniz,
mm-hmm.
who each came up with the differential calculus,
right?
Working continents apart at the same time.
See, now according to the theory I was just sketching out, that's because it was the right time, according
Yeah.
to the program, for calculus to
Yeah,
come on the
okay.
scene. So whether or not Newton and Leibniz even existed, if not them, it would have been somebody else. And what's interesting about that theory is it's supported in the synchronicity phenomenon that Jung talks about, where, for example, people in quantum physics were dealing with the same concepts that Picasso and the neo-cubists were dealing with artistically. Physics was dealing with it mathematically, and psychology was dealing with it symbolically, all happening at the same time with no overlap, yet they're working on the exact same thing, as if it's the time for that to be considered. You know, so there's...
I suppose if you want to use that theory, you will find more than sufficient proof.
Is it an act of creation or discovery, though?
This is what I'm saying. You will find more than enough proof.
Uh-huh.
But then again, that in itself is not necessarily the be-all and end-all, because you can find, or you can argue just as equally as that there is no connection between them. I mean, to me, there is no real connection between Leibniz and Newton, except that the various mathematical ideas were around at the time and being absorbed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can say the time is right, but I think the time is right because it was the build-up of the intellectual changes and progress, rather than some underlying grand plan, I guess is what I'm getting at. And where other things have occurred in the sciences and the mathematics, quite often the person who originally came up with the idea hasn't got the credit for it. I mean, have a look at the argument about who invented the telephone, for example.
Right, there's a big controversy over that.
You know, it's never going to be satisfied.
Yep.
Who invented the water toilet?
Right.
Now, the person who painted it was a bloke by the name of Thomas Crapper.
Right. And that's why it's called the crapper.
That's right. But he wasn't the one who invented it.
Right.
You know, the person who invented it did it 30 years ago, but hadn't even thought any more about it.
Yeah.
So, I'm not in the along the line of thinking that there is this grand master plan under it all, and time is opportune.
See,
no, I think Freemasonry. I think life is a bit more haphazard than that.
See, now, the thing is, this idea of the grand plan is actually an idea, platonically speaking, that's taken over the collective consciousness, particularly in relation to Freemasonry. Because of our political climate, because of technology having created a new world order, you know, no barriers globally, economically, the internet, etc. The new world order is here. Freemasonry had been talking about it as early as Pike. Pike was directing a unified view of history with Freemasonry at the cutting edge, resulting in what we are now living through.
Well, I think people were talking about it long before Pike.
Well, that's true, but Pike is a convenient figure to pin your hat on if you think you're looking for the Freemasons being behind the conspiracy. He's conveniently ubiquitous in references, but then again, that goes back to what we were saying before about deliberate misunderstanding. But
I mean, you've got to go back to, if you're going to use that Freemasonry behind the revolution conspiracy theory,
right,
you've got to go way back into the early 18th century,
or even further to the Templars, actually, right? Ultimately,
possibly, but there is a very strong case put.
Oh, it's my phone. Let me just pause for a moment.